Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. Today I want to talk about an interesting observation put forth in a publication called Fair Observer. And I'll leave the link so you can check this out for yourself. And this Fair Observer publication, it deals with, it tries to give you a realistic view of what's really happening by eliminating the fake news that seems to permeate throughout mainstream news these days. And anyway, it was written by Ran Chakrabarty, and it's a very interesting piece about the new legislation, the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act bill, which, as I've talked about before on this podcast, contains some very interesting discussion with regard to UFOs and recovered extraterrestrial non-human intelligent technology, all that kind of stuff. It was put forward in the Senate by the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, and he gets into this bill here, and it's very interesting. He says, and this is true, and I agree with this. It says this just could be the most important piece of legislation ever drafted in human history, with incendiary consequences. It will potentially answer once and for all whether or not we are alone in the universe. Now, I just want to stop there for a second. Of course, as everyone knows, I'm already of the opinion that we are not alone in this universe, based on everything I've researched and of course my own experiences, as I'm sure a lot of you out there feel the same way. But this bill really could be the beginning of the for the rest of the world finally realizing that yes, there is something here among us. But anyway, I'm going to skip through here a little bit. It says here, when you see it, the bill, your scrolling immediately pauses with first thought of, wait a minute, did I read that correctly? The division in question is described as the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Disclosure Act of 2023. So what does the Unidentified Anomalous Disclosure Act of 2023 actually say? There are no prizes for guessing what it might be associated with following recent sworn testimony by David Grush, David Fravor, and Ryan Graves before Congress earlier this summer on the subject of strange goings-on in the skies, crashed craft from other worlds, and biologics described as non-human in origin. Evidently, members of Congress have followed up on Grush's multiple responses along the lines of, I can't answer that now in public, but can do so behind closed doors. Those meetings appear to have taken place, and those few members of Congress who are security cleared to attend those meetings must have reached some astonishing conclusions. Yes, they must have. I've pointed this out numerous times in recent podcasts, actually for a while now, throughout this year, that Congress must have seen something, or they would not be putting forth stuff like this. And he also makes another point later on where he says in this article where the reality of the situation is that there's no way that this bill could have been just slapped together in 5 minutes, right? This had to take time. This was something that's been in the works for a while. It's just not something you come up with in 24 hours. It's too complex for something like that. So obviously the Congress has, some of these members of Congress have seen behind closed doors, has spurred them to put this legislation together because they realize that there most certainly is something going on that's above that they're not getting to see, and that the public is not getting to see. Anyway, let's continue with this article. It says, The introductory sections of the Act hit you like an express train. Section 9002A4 states that legislation is necessary because credible evidence and testimony indicates that federal government unidentified anomalous phenomena records exist and have not been declassified or subject to mandatory declassification review. Obviously, something has happened. Let me stop there for a second. Obviously, something has happened in the past, as we all know. There had to be something that happened in the past that has allowed this. Who knows if it was something that was signed by a former president in the 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe Nixon. There's been some talk about that he helped with this, whatever it is, this cover-up, to make sure that these records never, the most important records, never meet the light of day, never are ever put forward for the public to scrutinize. We just don't know. But anyway, let's continue here. It says, The Act provides for the disclosure of technologies of unknown origin and evidence of, quote, non-human intelligence, end quote. Just pause for a minute. If Congress legislated for hobgoblins, dwarves, hobbits, dragons, and orcs, you would think that they had lost the plot, right? By inference, it must have seen evidence in relation to the existence of those hobgoblins, dwarves, hobbits, dragons, and orcs, or why legislated in detail in relation to them. Can you see where this is heading? So stop there. Exactly. I mean, for all the people out there, in fact, a lot of people in the mainstream news are just not seeing this. They cannot see it. They're not recognizing how important this language in this legislation is. I mean, they are saying, I mean, if they're not going to do this unless they feel like for sure that there's something going on. Obviously, they've seen things that the public has not seen yet, or they would not have ever put something like this forward. There's just no possible way. Anyway, continuing here. It says, to emphasize the point, word searches for, quote, unidentified anomalous phenomena, end quote, tally 169 counts in the bill's text, and references to, quote, non-human tally 26. On the other hand, tinfoil hat, in whatever spelling, appears nowhere, and neither does conspiracy or alien, except in the unrelated legal sense of those terms. This is serious business. Evidently, Congress is not concerned with crackpots and sci-fi enthusiasts, but with extraterrestrial intelligence and technology themselves. Yeah, that's true. They have to be. Obviously, they know something. Congress, people in Congress, have seen enough that they're convinced. They're convinced. There's no way they would ever have put this forward. No, there's just no way. They're convinced. They're not going to make incredible fools out of themselves, despite what debunkers or some mainstream pundits might say, or people like Neil deGrasse Tyson or whatever these people say. It doesn't matter, because the reality is that Congress has seen things that these people have not, and they are acting on that. Anyway, continuing here, it says, so just what evidence does Congress think might be out there? We can glean some insight from the disclosure procedures, from the exceptions to those procedures that Congress has carved out, and from how the bill describes the information and artifacts concerned. And then he has a subhead here, disclosure, with a question mark. Section 9004 of the Act sets up a record collection in the National Archive of all records that the government may have on the subject of unidentified anomalous phenomena. That's great, you might think, but it might wind up empty if government departments claim that they have absolutely nothing in their records to contribute. In that regard, Section 9005 is quite interesting. Each government office would have to identify and organize their records on the subject and prepare such records for inclusion in the National Archive, with an additional provision preventing their destruction, alteration, or mutilation in any way. Let me just stop there for 1 second. Now, this bill has not passed yet. I have concerns, and I'm sure there's a lot of people within the UFO community who have concerns that some of these records, if they're not already destroyed, they're going to be destroyed. You would imagine I could imagine easily that the people responsible for keeping this cover up, for maintaining this cover up for so long, are seeing the writing on the wall and realize, well, we have these records, and these records are the only thing that could. One of the only things that could possibly prove what we know. If we got rid of them now, there's no legislation out there that no law out there says we can't. So what if they just say they got rid of them and we don't have anything? So that's always a concern that I have. And who knows? For all we know, all the records on Roswell, all the film that was taken, everything could have been destroyed. I have trouble believing that somebody would be that terrible to do something like that. But you just never know. But anyway, continuing. It says, but what about the really sensitive stuff? There's a further catch in the provision speaking to records pending review, which seems to suggest that whatever data dumps might occur are likely to be very benign, with the more serious stuff being constantly queued with mysterious reasons for delay. Still, Section 9005C does say that within 300 days of the date of enactment of the Act, the head of each government department has to review, identify, and organize each record of anomalous phenomena for disclosure to the public, review by a board created by the Act, and transmission to the National Archive. But this, so basically they're telling them they're going to have a certain amount of time. All the government department heads are going to have to put together all the documentation they have on this subject, review it, organize it, identify what it is, and then it's going to be put before this 9-member panel, which we'll talk about later. And then it's also going to have to be placed into the National Archive. But anyway, continuing. But disclosure doesn't just apply to government records. The Act defines a close observer as anyone who has come into close proximity to unidentified anomalous phenomena or non-human intelligence, and a, quote, controlling authority, end quote, means any federal, state, or local government department, presumably even including the sheriff's office in Roswell, commercial company, academic institution, or private sector entity in physical possession of technologies of unknown origin or biological evidence of non-human intelligence. So it actually is talking to the people directly who have come in contact with this materials, alien bodies, recovered craft. They need to apply. This applies to them too. It's not just government records. They need to come forward and let Congress, let the National Archives, let this Board of Review know what they know. Anyway, continuing here. It says these are quite wide-ranging definitions and will no doubt spook private sector entities who have been alleged to have such materials in their possession, though the inclusion of, quote, physical, end quote, in the definition of controlling authority also makes it quite narrow. If a corporation had such material, an astute lawyer would advise its transfer to an offshore shell company in order to argue that they don't possess it, avoiding difficult questions about how they got it. The definition should perhaps be expanded to include records relating to such material, which will inevitably run the risk of destruction, and possession by entities in foreign jurisdictions over which American companies exercise control. So this guy's making the argument that this bill's not tough enough. So if there's things that some of these private corporations might be sitting on right now, they might just right now be in the process of moving that stuff out of here, out of this country, put it someplace else where it's off limits, and then there's nothing we can do about it. So they need to change that language to address that issue, and they probably will. I'm sure that there are people in Congress who are going to become aware of this article. If they already aren't, if they already haven't come to this conclusion yet, they're going to figure this out, because obviously they're starting to realize that there has been this cover-up all these years. There's no question. And anyway, the next subhead here says preventing disclosure. Aside from these possible loopholes, sections of the Act address the possibility that some material may remain concealed. In that regard, paragraph DI of Section 9005C is a critical provision. When deciding to disclose, the head of each government department shall determine whether the unidentified anomalous phenomenon records are covered by the standards for postponement of public disclosure. The Act establishes a board to review such cases. Naturally, in these circumstances, you can easily imagine that the files would be carted off to the board and never actually see the light of day. Yeah, so that's a concern. Section 9006 basically says that disclosure can be postponed if there's clear and convincing evidence that the threat to military defense, intelligence operations, or conduct of foreign relations posed by the public disclosure of anomalous phenomena record is of such gravity that it outweighs the public interest of disclosure. Well, let me just say this right now. Of course, they're going to come to that conclusion every time now, aren't they? I mean, they could always just say, we can't let the public know about this. This would cause panic. This would cause disaster. I mean, people will go crazy. We can't do this. This is going to hurt our national security. This is going to, who knows how it's going to, how it's going to affect foreign relations. You know, they could come up with all kinds of excuses. So it seems like there are some loopholes in here, in that bill. At the same time, it is important. The fact that this bill even exists is the point, though, that I think people need to start taking into consideration. And it continues here. It says, this is the logical paradox we continue to find ourselves in when we talk about little green men and flying saucers. Of course, I don't appreciate the use of little green men because it still makes it sound ridiculous, but this is a serious article nonetheless, other than that. If it's real, then it's obviously a national security issue and can't be disclosed. If it can't be disclosed, then by inference it is real, and if it can't be disclosed, then the very evidence that proves that they exist is withheld from public scrutiny. So yeah, that is the paradox that we are in. I mean, they could always just say, hey, we can't release this to the public because look at what's going to happen. We can't do this. It can't be disclosed. The public can't deal with this, which I think they can. I don't agree with that. I think, of course, there'll be some people who are going to crack up a little bit, but for the most part, the public deserves to know the truth about their place in this universe. Continuing here. It says the review board itself will make the contentious determination of whether disclosure needs to be postponed. Section 9007, which governs the process, is a very dense piece of drafting and requires multiple readings to see the wood and not the trees. Essentially, we can summarize it as follows. The board's 9 members are appointed by none other than the President of the United States with the advice and consent of the Senate, and shall be suitably qualified, security cleared, and without conflict of interest. Whether the review board reaches decisions by majority or unanimity, it is not abundantly clear. But who those 9 members may be is obviously going to be fundamental to the decision making they might be capable or incapable of. Depending on the background of the appointees selected, their views may naturally align with or potentially oppose embedded positions within the Department of Defense or the Pentagon. So yes, it's going to be very important about who goes on that 9-member panel. But you have to wonder, even if you put on people that have studied UFOs for a long time, like say, I suggest that someone like a historian, they say a historian should be on that board, on that 9-member panel. I think someone like Richard Dolan should be approached. He should, somebody who studied this, who understands the implications, who's thought about this for a long time. People who haven't called it silly for 25 years. People who have actually studied this should be on that panel. And they should be the people who determine whether make decisions on this and vote on things like this and whether things should be made public or not. But you have to wonder, it would be interesting, wouldn't it, if you have people, if say you did have people like that and say they still came to the conclusion that the public cannot know. That would be telling. That would be very scary, wouldn't it? But anyway, I digress. Continuing here. It says, irrespective of the decision of the review board, ultimately, under Section 9009C4B, the review board has to give the president contemporaneous notice of its determination, and the president has the sole ability to require the disclosure or even the postponement of disclosure of records. The buck stops with the president, it would appear. So yes, ultimately, this 9-member, there could be information that's provided to this from some department within the government about UFOs and recovered craft and dead alien bodies. It could be given. That information could be provided to this 9-member board that's appointed by the Senate, that approved by the Senate and ultimately approved by the president. And that board could look at it and decide, well, okay, we think it should be made public, this stuff. And then the president could look at it, and the president would make the final decision. And that would be a big decision to make, wouldn't it? Especially if it finally ends this cover-up. If it finally brings to light the truth to the public that, yes, there has been a cover-up for a long time. I think what needs to happen is that the people that have been covering this up need to start coming up with their excuses. That's what they need to do. Come up with some good ones. It doesn't matter. As long as, something that the public could accept. I mean, obviously, what they're going to say is that we are afraid about what the implications were. We wanted to study this privately like this. We thought it best to keep it away from the public for all this time because we were not sure what these beings are up to. We needed to keep that under wraps because of national security implications. That's what they're probably going to say. Things like that. And I'm sure that they already have some excuses lined up, but they better figure that part out. I hope they already have it figured out. We'll see. And then the next subhead here says, alien technology and bodies? Of course, we don't know what kind of material the Act, if passed, might uncover, but we can infer some quite extraordinary things from the Act's provisions and definitions. To get all closet Roswell conspiracy theorists excited, the Act refers to, quote, legacy programs, end quote, meaning all federal, state, and local government, commercial industry, and private sector endeavors to collect, exploit, or reverse engineer technologies of unknown origin, or examine biological evidence of living or deceased non-human intelligence that predate the Act. And of course, the term unidentified anomalous phenomena includes what we would historically call flying saucers or UFOs. Now, of course, there's most certainly something that crashed in Roswell, that a craft of some sort that contained beings that were not of this earth, just as many witnesses have expressed over the decades. So we'll see. I mean, are we going to get these things? I mean, again, all of it will get presented to this board, and then ultimately, whoever the president is will make that decision as to whether or not the public should be given this information. Continuing here, if the earlier parts of the Act aren't jaw-dropping enough, then Section 910 will have your eyeballs on stocks. The provision begins with the statement that the federal government, quote, shall exercise eminent domain over any and all recovered technologies of unknown origin and biological evidence of non-human intelligence that may be controlled by private persons or entities in the interest of the public good. All such material, presuming it exists, shall be made available to the review board for examination. Following such examination, the review board shall determine whether it constitutes technology of an unknown origin or biological evidence of non-human intelligence, and whether it qualifies for postponement of disclosure. Now, it is a jaw-dropping provision, because this to me, why would you have this in there unless those Congress people must have seen stuff. Otherwise, this kind of provision wouldn't be in this bill. I mean, think about what they're saying here. I mean, basically, it's almost to what a lot of us have suspected for a long time. Basically, somehow there are private entities that are studying this. That's what's going on, but the government, the federal government, acts as basically bodyguard to this. There's no question that early on in the early days of recovering crashed UFOs, it was the Army, the Army Air Forces, the Army, entities like that. Then of course the United States Air Force throughout the late 40s and 50s, when these things would happen, there would have to, most certainly would be government. But at some point, a lot of this stuff had to be passed on to private corporations, and they were studying it. And then at some point, I think that this is what's possible now. I believe that the teams that are sent out to recover this are basically teams that are from private corporations, and maybe they might be provided some military assistance, basically to cordon off areas and stuff like that. I believe that the military, the Pentagon, has some sort of a deal that probably a lot of people in Congress don't know about, and somehow this was allowed. This permission was granted long time in the past by like some sort of a Majestic 12 board and/or a president, and it's been going on for a long time now. And because they felt it was so important that this needed to be kept secret, that not even presidents or Congress should be totally briefed on it. I think that something like that is what's been going on. But anyway, continuing here with this article, it says that the provision stops there begs further questions. It's not clear what eminent domain means, and it's not clear whether private persons or entities are to be construed to include legal persons like corporations. It's an extraordinary provision, potentially suggesting a naturalization or expropriation of such technologies and biological evidence by the federal government. If so, the obvious question is how a private company or entity came into possession of such material in the first place. And it is worth underlining that controlling entities in possession of technologies of unknown origin or biological evidence of non-human intelligence, as defined in the Act, include the private sector. Yeah, the private sector, they obviously Congress has seen some things. They understand some things. A lot of things that, of course, historians into the UFO cover-up have understood for a long time. Yes, there's no question that private corporations are involved, and Congress seems to know this now. The Congress is basically, this is almost, to me, this whole thing, this whole bill is almost like admitting that this is what's going on, or they would not be putting this together. Just like this writer points out, if it would have been dwarves and elves and goblins, hobgoblins, if it would have been something like that, everyone, what the hell's wrong with the Congress? But it is extraterrestrials, non-human intelligence. They are doing that. That's because there's something to it, and yet the mainstream is not catching on to this. This is like one of the biggest. It is. This is one of the most important pieces of legislation of all time, because it tells. Not only is it trying to set the ball in motion to finally end this cover-up, but it's telling you a story. It's telling you something, and you read between the lines and you understand. Obviously, there's something been going on. Anyway, continuing here. It says, in this tacit acknowledgement that the government has offloaded crash retrieval material to the private sector for the purpose of reverse engineering. Yes, it is tacit. That's what it is. It has to be. What else could it be? Anyway, continuing. If so, then it begs the question as to who actually owns the material in question and any derivative products from it. Does documentation account for the transfer of ownership or conditions attached to it? What intellectual property rights have arisen from that material? Have they been registered? By whom? Yes. There are so many questions. This has all been done secret, behind the closed doors, away from the purview of the Congress. And they're starting to understand. They understand it now. They know. They know enough that they've written this bill. And this bill has obviously been in the works for a long time. Continuing here, it says, a further point for reflection. The act assumes that potential possession of biological evidence of non-human intelligence is in fact dead. But what if it were alive? On one legal basis does the detention of non-human intelligence rest? And with what oversight conditions and by whom? What legal rights should it have? One could suggest that if contact was benign, then treatment parallel to diplomatic representatives would be intuitively appropriate. If the contact was malevolent, then treatment in accordance with applicable criminal law on detention would be the intuitive parallel. Essentially, the act does not contemplate a scenario and the consequences where non-human intelligence is found alive and the Pandora's box that it opens. So that, let me just stop there. That's a great, this guy points at, this is good. I mean, they need to include something like that. What about creatures that are alive? What are you doing with them? What's should Congress know about those? I believe so. Should the public know about that? Yes, of course they should. Anyway, continuing. The next subhead says here, a historic document. And I'm going to skip through it for a little bit here. It says, for the first time in history, we are seeing a piece of legislation that is likely going to become law, with no doubt last-minute revisions to potentially water down the consequences of it, that tacitly assumes at its starting point that, far from us being alone in the universe, parts of that universe may already have been and continue to be here. By analogy to hobgoblins, dwarfs, hobbits, dragons, and orcs, it's absolutely inconceivable that Congress would legislate about a subject in the absence of evidence to suggest that its subject matter requires regulation. To say that the act is, quote, out of this world, end quote, is a metaphor that just also happens, for perhaps the first time ever, to relate to its subject matter. Though the congressional hearings of July 2023 have obviously catalyzed the timing of it, the act must have been in the drafting pipeline for some considerable time. You can't just magically conjure up something of this detail and complexity without a substantial lead time, with review and commentary by relevant stakeholders. Let me just, that's exactly true. That's exactly what we're talking about here. There's no way. It took a long time to put this bill together. So they've known for a while. It was not long before David Grush sat at that table along with Ryan Graves and David Fravor. And continuing here, it says, even though the structured processes within the act will be fairly familiar for any constitutional lawyer, its subject matter is evidently not. Perhaps the closest analogy for private law is that of how we deal with confidential information and to whom it can be disclosed. On that analogous note, the mechanics of any determination by the review board are going to be absolutely critical. If it discloses, then who knows what the consequences might be. If it fails to disclose, we implicitly infer that the only reason for blocking disclosure is the very fear of what those consequences will be. Exactly. Exactly. If all this bill passes, and then that board was to look at something, and then okay, we're not going to disclose that, then people are going to be wondering, is that's going to sound worse than what we may have even feared. Anyway, continuing. It is on that note, what the consequences might be, that we should further reflect. The purpose of the act might very well be to establish the truth about a subject that has long been ridiculed, but the reality of what we may discover will have its own ineluctable consequences. Who of us are ready for that? Well, let me tell you something. I'm already there, man. There's a lot of us already there. I know there's some people that aren't ready for it, but I think they'll handle it. They'll deal with it just like anybody else. Just like, over the decades, there's always been these people. You see them all the time. I never believed in this stuff before until I saw it. Now I believe it. Yeah, they're okay. They're all right, except for the ridicule that they face. But other than that, they still live their lives, right? Now, some people's lives got ruined over the ridicule and everything like that. But once you come out with the truth, what's going to be the problem? There's people that never give second thoughts about these kind of things, UFOs, extraterrestrials, and then they encounter them, right? They have an experience. You see it all the time, all right? I never believed in that stuff. Just for recent, the Las Vegas alien story. I know some people are still not sure if that's real or not. I still believe that was real. But those people, I never thought about that stuff before. I didn't think it was real, but now they do because they had an experience. There's stories like this for decades now, ever since we started noticing these things, since the 40s. I never thought this stuff could be true. I always thought it was nonsense, but now, whoa, yeah, it's real. It's just time to end this nonsense. It's time to blow the lid off this whole cover-up, because we're all sick of it. But yeah, I think what this guy's pointing out, this could be the most important piece of legislation of all time that's ever been drafted. I have to agree with it. I thought this was a very good article. Now, I'll leave the link so you can check it out for yourself. I highly recommend it. Okay, moving on. I want to talk about an article that appeared in the Daily Express U.S., and the headline reads, "Scientist warns imminent alien invasion means plan for diplomacy with ETs is needed." Now, the article is taking a lot of quotes from John Gertz. John Gertz is a president of the Foundation for Investing in Research on SETI Science and Technology and former chairman of the board of the SETI Institute. Now, the SETI Institute, of course, is the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute. I don't really agree with SETI. And I have a lot of issues with SETI because, I mean, if you're going to call yourself the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, why don't you look at what's here on this planet right now? There's apparently extraterrestrial intelligence here right now. That's what these non-human intelligent beings are. They're here right now. But instead, the SETI Institute, for decades now, basically ridicules that concept and believes that the only way that we'll ever find out about extraterrestrial intelligence from other worlds is by listening to radio signals, and that's what they do. So I have a problem with that. But let's go through this article and see what it says. Basically, it starts with, contrary to popular belief, interstellar space, quite literally the space between the stars, isn't just empty space. It's packed full of hydrogen and helium and, according to an increasing number of scientists, advanced alien civilizations. Well, let me just stop right there for a second. Yes, there are advanced alien civilizations out there, no doubt about it. There's no question about it. Some of them are here right now. A lot of us know that for a fact. Continuing, one of those scientists is a man by the name of John Gertz, the author of a new paper aptly titled Interstellar Diplomacy. Gertz has been involved in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence community for years and has written a few compelling pieces for Scientific American. Although humans are not ready to embark on interstellar travel just yet, it would take tens of thousands of years to reach the nearest star, other far more advanced civilizations could be. In fact, as you read this piece, they could be on their way to us right now, hurtling toward Earth at an unimaginable speed. What are we going to do if and when they arrive? Let me tell you. Let me just stop there. What we've already been doing. We've been covering. Here's what we're going to do. What we've been doing. We've been covering up the reality of this. The governments across the world have been trying to keep this reality away from the public. Gertz doesn't understand this, or either that or he's playing along with the government, or maybe he's part of the cover-up. Who knows, right? But that's diplomacy, if anything, has already been going on behind the scenes, or perhaps we don't know. I don't see how you could have. How could you have communication with intelligent beings from other worlds? They'll look at it. I mean, it would be like us having a discussion with a lab rat. Whoa, hey, what do you want us to do? You don't mind if I stick this needle in your eye a little bit, do you? Is that all right? That's about the diplomacy, all the diplomacy you're going to have, right? I mean, I don't see how you could do that. How you could open up diplomatic relations with alien creatures. This isn't Star Wars or Star Trek or anything like that. We're talking that's all fantasy. That's like they think in their minds. The SETI Institute. This is a fantasy. What they're talking about here. This is like like a whole bunch of people coming off to meet in a Senate kind of setting, where you see people coming off a spacecraft arriving like Jar Jar Binks in a robe, and we're all going to sit down and talk diplomacy. This is crazy. Think about how crazy this sounds. Anyway, continuing here. In the paper, Gertz argues that contact with aliens may be imminent, and for this reason, he suggests world leaders must come together and develop a formal plan for diplomacy with intelligent extraterrestrial life. This is insane. Think about this. This is why I've talked about this a number of times. That's what they really think. They really think that we're going to have a sit down with a bunch of extraterrestrials from all different worlds. Once they find out that we're here, they're all going to come here. It's going to be this big regal event. They're living in a fantasy world. This is unreal. This is like a Star Trek episode where the Romulans and the Klingons and the Earthlings are all sitting down together to talk about diplomacy. Come on, this is insane. This guy's watched too much TV. Anyway, there have been no planning among nations for the aftermath of a first detection, writes the author. Take note of the word aftermath, which refers to the after effects of a significantly distressing event. If Gertz is to be believed, a deeply unpleasant visit from extraterrestrial intelligence could be on the cards. The classic SETI paradigm has been challenged by myself and others who have argued that ET's better strategy for making contact would be to send physical probes to our solar system for that purpose, he notes. Well, that might be true. A lot of these beings that are coming here, but for all we know, these could be, like Gary Nolan suggests, biological robots, and actually the beings themselves might not be here. They might be these are just the worker bees that are sent out to do the dirty work, or whatever they're up to, whatever they're doing, studying us or interacting with us or manipulating us or whatever they're up to. We don't know. Continuing here, it says, with the rise of ChatGPT, it's easy to imagine a much more advanced system or form of intelligent life, many times smarter than mere mortals, making contact with us, perhaps even taking over our planet. Theoretically, a technologically advanced civilization could already be familiar with the English language or all 7,000 languages currently used by humans. Why would they have any interest in learning our languages? To facilitate contact with humans, of course. Now, again, I don't see this. I think that from what we've learned, from what we've heard from people who have been in contact with extraterrestrials, they could read your mind. They don't need language. Mind reading, I would imagine it's more of it's a universal thing. They could figure it out what you're thinking, and it translates in their brain somehow to whatever language they use, and they understand what you're saying and you understand what they're saying. I don't think it matters, but that's just my opinion. It doesn't make me right. Anyway, according to Gertz, an alien probe might enter into dialogue with Earth in near real time rather than with a star-to-star back and forth measured in centuries or millennia. In other words, we should be prepared for first contact. We've already had it. Let me stop again. We've already had first contact. It's already been going on. It's been going on since at least 1947. At least. There's been contact. We've had contact with extraterrestrials. Apparently, in fact, one of the Roswell extraterrestrials was still alive at that crash site. And we can only assume that there was some sort of effort to communicate with that being. But beyond that, as we know, there are millions of people over the decades who have encountered these beings, and they have communicated with them. Ariel School, did this guy not know? Does he not hear that story? Or maybe he just doesn't believe it. Anyway, continuing. Franz von der Dunk, a professor of space law at University of Nebraska Lincoln College of Law, told Daily Express US that defining interstellar diplomacy is not as easy as one might imagine. Not wanting to be facetious, but since this is not a well-established term or concept, it can be whatever you want it to mean, says the academic. However, he adds, the word diplomacy is normally understood as a tool to communicate between states, the legal word for countries or nations, in order to protect national interests and to avoid international conflict as much as possible. So it seems the most logical meaning of interstellar diplomacy would probably involve communication between, on the one hand, the states on Earth, possibly collectively, whether through the United Nations or otherwise, and any entity comparable to a state on Earth somewhere outside of the solar system. In short, says van der Dunk, interstellar diplomacy does not exist yet since we have not been in touch with any such extraterrestrial entity. You're wrong. Van der Dunk is wrong, because we have been. There's been communication. There has been they've communicated with certain humans on this planet. There's no question about it. It's happened already. But relating to, I don't think we're on the same level to sit down and talk diplomacy with extraterrestrials. I just don't think we're anywhere close to that. We're talking maybe 100,000 years in the future or something, 10,000, 20,000, 30. Who knows? We're not there yet. We're not ready. We don't even know what diplomacy to extraterrestrials probably doesn't compute. For all we know. I mean, how that would let's open up diplomatic relations with those ants crawling up that anthill there. What are we talking about here? This is insane. Anyway, continuing here. However, Avi Loeb, a professor of science and director of the Institute for Theory and Computation at Harvard, urges readers to ignore the fact the term doesn't exist yet and instead focus on the possibilities of interacting with advanced alien civilizations. And here's a direct quote from Avi Loeb. He says, we should welcome the opportunity to learn from extraterrestrial visitors because they may represent our technological future. The greatest pleasure of intelligent beings is to learn the unknown, and there is no better way to accomplish that than meeting a messenger from far away. What, in his opinion, would these messages look like? I have no idea, responds Loeb. I prefer not to imagine, but to explore. When you go out on a date, it is better to stay open-minded than to look at the mirror and imagine someone just like you, because you are likely to be surprised or disappointed by developing expectations ahead of time. Yes, there's a good one. You don't know what to expect, right? If you're going to sit down with an extraterrestrial, you're not going to know what to expect anyway, so you might as well not even think of it that way. I don't even know. We're talking Star Wars stuff here. We're talking Star Trek. We're talking Romulans and Klingons sitting down at a table with us and talking shop. It's insane. It's just not. I mean, if you're 100,000 years more advanced than human beings, you're not going to sit down at a table and talk diplomacy. What do you got to offer? Nothing. If they wanted to do whatever they wanted to do, they're going to do it, and there's nothing you can do about it. Anyway, continuing. But if they do come, how will we communicate with them? Oh, let me just stop there. We already are communicating with them. They do it with telepathy, mental powers. They have that ability, and that's how communication is accomplished in many of the cases that we've all know about. So they need to read some books, these people. They need to read some books. After all, just because humans have mouths and we use these holes to communicate with one another, this doesn't mean that advanced alien civilizations, if they even exist, communicate in a similar manner. Loeb agrees. They do exist. I know that for a fact. I saw one with my own eyes. There was a being. I saw one. Anyway, for this reason, he thinks we might have to turn to AI for assistance. We might need to employ our own artificial intelligence systems to interpret their AI systems, says the Israeli-American theoretical physicist. That's because our AI might feel kinship to their AI more than to us. We have already developed an alien mind on Earth in the form of large language models like ChatGPT. Okay, there you go. Yeah, I don't see. Again, we were talking about opening diplomatic relations with extraterrestrials. They're already here, folks. They're acting like they didn't show up yet. And I guess this is mostly coming from the SETI Institute. Yeah, it's coming. We're listening for radio signals, and then one day when they come here, we'll be able to hopefully be able to open up diplomatic relations with them. Think about how crazy this is. Where are they at? Have they not seen the recent legislation that I just talked about in the previous article there that I was going through? Did they not see? Are they not aware of any of this stuff? I mean, what are they doing? What kind of game of pretend are they? This is like in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, the land of make-believe for these SETI goofballs. This is ridiculous. I don't know what they're thinking. It's time for SETI to start looking at the extraterrestrial intelligence that seems to be on this planet. That there's most certainly something here, right? They need to be looking at that instead of listening for radio signals and talking about opening up diplomatic relations. Any sort of highly advanced being that's going to come here is not going to be interested in opening diplomatic relations. I just don't see it. Anyway, what it seems like to me, it seems that we have people who are looked upon by people in the mainstream media, like people like John Gertz, like they're the serious people, right? They're the serious people, but yet, but they're not. It's like we have this all ass backward, right? The people who are sounding the alarm over the decades about, there's a cover up and there's most certainly an extraterrestrial presence here. Those people are viewed by the mainstream news, right, as fringe and crackpot. But then there's other people, like the people within SETI, who are viewed as, they're the intelligent ones. They're the serious ones. They're the normal people who have serious ideas about extraterrestrials and the potentiality of extraterrestrials out there in the universe. When really it's the opposite, right? They're looking at these people they're just not accepting the reality. The evidence is here. They don't look at it. They don't want to look at it. They deny it. They ridicule anybody who says they encountered these beings, and yet they're like the mainstream. The darlings of the mainstream. These people, like the Seth Shostacks of SETI, John Gertz, the Neil deGrasse Tyson, these people who just deny it, don't study it, and just and offer some ideas about what it might be like, and maybe we could open up diplomatic relations. They're talking like something out of a Star Trek movie, It's all insane. They're the insane ones. They're the insane ones, but yet they for some reason they are the darlings of the media. The media always goes to them for serious discussion on this topic. This is not serious. This is unserious. This is what these people should be doing. Instead of worrying about opening up diplomatic relations with extraterrestrials, they should be talking about the evidence that's here. There are extraterrestrials here already. They've been manipulating humans. They've been interacting with humans on occasion. They've been seen, their craft have been seen millions of times, right, over the decades, since at least, many times since the 40s, and who knows how long before that, but we really didn't start noticing them until the 40s. They should be interested in that aspect of it, but they're not. And yet they're the ones who, for whatever reason, the mainstream turns to. This is nonsense. This is absolute garbage. Anyway, I want to say thank you again for joining me. Until next time.